Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cardinal Careers podcast. My name is Jessica Weicha, and I'm here with the rest of the career development team, Barbara Faust, Heidi Nunez, Margaret Stacy Duffy, and Mac Watt. And today we're going to be talking about resumes. So I feel like the first thing when it comes to resumes and something that's always forgotten about is what is the goal of a resume? What's the point of writing it? What do we want employers to know? What's kind of that overarching goal of a resume?
Barb, I'm going to steal your thunder here because I know that I've heard you say often in workshops that the job of a resume is to get your foot in the door, to get you that interview. Really, this is your flyer, your sales pitch. This is, what all the credentials that you're putting out in front of you to get you into that interview and networking situation. That's the real goal of the resume.
One thing that I would add that I find myself saying often to students is you don't need to put the pressure on to try in one page to capture like everything about who you are and all of the experiences you've ever had. It's really a point to make put down the most relevant skills and experiences you've had in all of the experiences you've had, or at least the ones that are the most relevant to whatever it is that you're applying for. And I remind students especially when they're over that one page and they have to take things off their resume, sometimes because it's really just not relevant or they're incredibly involved, as we know so many North Central students are, that just because something isn't on your resume doesn't mean it's not important. And I know I'm getting off topic there to the point, but I think it kind of circles back that the point is it's to show that employer or whoever it is that's reading your resume the most relevant skills and experiences you've had. And so sometimes one experience you've had might not be relevant, and that means maybe it doesn't belong on your resume, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And I like to say that because I've had the experience of editing things off my resume and it doesn't feel good, especially if you're proud of those things. But I would say relevancy.
I felt that a lot building my resume. I've had 5 different part-time jobs. I always list one, but I don't, employer won't care if I worked at Panera Bread as my first job and then went to Goodwill. So I always say, it's hard to get rid of them, but you need to condense it down.
And that's why we talk so much about the tailored resume, right? It's not enough to just have one standard resume. It's great if you have one that you feel like you're using for particular positions, but we always want to take a look at the job description that we're applying for and make sure that the resume is specifically tailored to the experiences and the skills that they're looking for in that job, right? So that's why we also talk about the tailored resume to make I think that connects directly to what you're saying, Margaret and Jessica, about maybe having to make those hard decisions about taking things out that you may be very proud of, right, but may not be relevant in that for that particular job application. I think that also connects very, very well to the purpose of the resume. It is not necessarily to list all of your accomplishments that you've had during the course of your life, right? Not to be confused with a CV, a curriculum vitae, right? The full course of your life there. The resume is a one-page directly targeted document for a particular job. So yeah, you've got to make some hard decisions about what goes in there, and even then what responsibilities and accomplishments in those roles you're going to highlight in those bullet points as well. You can't list everything.
Mm-hmm. So those bullet points, how I've reviewed a lot of resumes, and I've seen students struggle with bullet points. How do you go about writing a good bullet point? What's your methodology in it?
I think, at least for me, when I was writing my resume, one of the biggest things was like a consistency of how like you're formatting all your bullet points. So if you put a period on the first bullet point, you got to put a period on all of your bullet points, or else it just looks off. And you don't want to, write a full paragraph for your bullet point. You want it to be like almost like a incomplete, like fragmented sentence that just gets the point across. At least that's how my resume is set up. It's still enough words to where you have an idea of, okay, I understand what they're doing without, writing down the entire life story in one bullet point.
Mac, I'm so glad you said fragment, because I think that's the most common thing I tell students, is that when you are writing a resume, we're asking you to write differently than you have been taught to write almost your entire life, right? You're taught your entire life that you have a subject and you have a period. And here we're actively telling you to make fragments, that the best thing that you need to do is start with a verb, and you don't need a period. And this is very counterintuitive to somebody who has spent most of their life learning to write, in that academic setting. So I think I'm glad that you mentioned that. We are asking for fragments. You never use I, you rarely use the, right? And it's never narrative, right? So it's never like a paragraph. We want it to be short, to the point, again, starting with the most active verb that you can think of to describe what you're highlighting there. And you want to make sure that you're not using the same verb over and over again, right? Those bullet points in those sections where you have assisted, coordinated, managed, assistant, coordinated, managed, that can get very repetitive for a recruiter to review. And you want to, this is the first word in that bullet point. You want to make sure that it begins to highlight your skill. Is it led? Is it managed? Is it, again, now I'm getting stuck with assisted, managed, coordinated, but you really want to vary this, the verb that you have in there. This is where the punch comes in. I don't want to get in too much on I know that Barb has some good thoughts around the magic bullet formula here, because we do talk about that a lot when it comes to career development. So I just want to prep it here to say that one of the most common, I think, I don't want to say mistakes, but the most common tendency for everyone, not just students, the most common tendency for everyone is to just list the tasks that you do every single day, or maybe the tasks that you were hired on to do based on your job description, which will usually be something like answer emails, answer phone calls, file papers, drive the van, or something like that. And we want to make sure, this is the challenge, and this is why it's so hard. The bullet points are the hardest part. We want to make sure to get beyond the daily task. And I know Barb talks about the magic bullet formula in terms of making sure that you can talk about your skills and your tasks equals the accomplishment. So you're really trying to highlight the skills and the accomplishment in your bullet point. Move beyond the task.
Right. And I can sort of jump in here. And I think partly I can sort of describe what I do when I'm working with students around their bullet points, because I think bullet points are the hardest thing on your resume. And sometimes it's just having a conversation or reflecting, like, what did you do in the role? How did you help somebody? What was the purpose? What was your accomplishment? What strengths or skills did you use? So sometimes it can be really helpful to sort of start with that. So,
which are top of the line, just so that I can try to keep,
and I'm sure you can hear my husband.
Anyway, yeah.
That's our daily life in a pandemic, right? Work from home. That's the reality of it.
Absolutely.
So I think that this probably goes without saying, but I think like one way that I've gone about this, because it's not easy to do this, what we're talking about, and I know we've all probably experienced that writing a resume, it takes a lot of time. Like it takes it is not something that you can crank out the night before it's due, or if hopefully you're not doing that, don't do that. Give yourself time. But I think one thing that I've done, and what Heidi's talking about, where you're really going beyond those daily tasks, sometimes it is hard to get out of that mindset. So one thing that I've done before is just brain dump, like get a Word document. What did I do at that job? Start, and then if you've got a friend who worked at that job with you, like, what did we do there? Like, what do you remember about that experience? Or, as much as you can, brain dump on a Word document or in a journal. I talk about journaling a lot. I think that's really helpful, because then maybe you can zoom out and really see the whole picture, and pick out, okay, what am I really, really proud of? Because oftentimes that's something that you're able to talk about really easily. And the same goes for the other question you'd want to ask yourself is, okay, what's really relevant? It's probably not, chopping vegetables if you worked at Subway, but maybe communicating with guests, like that probably is something that could be really relevant. So I think that's something I just wanted to acknowledge, like, this is not an easy task. This takes some time. And I'm sure everyone can speak on that, but give yourself some time. This isn't easy.
I think students also underestimate themselves in those part-time jobs. Like, a lot of people call it like, oh, you're fluffing your resume when you use fancy words to describe you working somewhere. But like, for example, like, I worked at Pandora before. I sold jewelry. That was the premise of my job. But in reality, I was also communicating with customers. I was creating displays. I was creating designs. I was persuading customers to buy more jewelry. And so even though you may think, oh, I'm just stocking shelves, you're doing a lot more than you think you are. And so kind of stepping back a little bit, being like, oh, did I communicate? Did I manage my time? Was I organized? Yeah, you were. You were stocking shelves, but you were also doing all of those things as well. And so I feel like, don't underestimate those part-time jobs sometimes.
You nailed it, Jessica. And that's exactly right. That's exactly what we're talking about when we say move beyond the daily tasks and think about what you did from that bigger picture perspective that is transferable to the next step for you. What are those core skills, which we call those career readiness skills, that the next employer, any employer, is going to want? And we know communication, right, at the top of that list, problem solving, critical thinking, professionalism, work ethic, your teamwork, leadership, digital literacy, and your ability to work, respect and value other cultures as well. All of those things are present in all of our experiences. So it doesn't matter as much that you're chopping vegetables or that you're stocking inventory, but all of those other skills that you learned and developed and know, and now are able to transfer into another role, that's what's important. And again, to the point, that's the hard part. Really taking the time to be reflective about your experiences and reflective to think about how you did in those roles and how it's going to transfer in the future. That's the hard work of writing the resume. The formatting, the organization, the spelling, the grammar, all of those things we can help with. And most of the times what I see is that students, everybody, I should keep saying students, but this is really everybody, spends a lot of time in trying to make it perfect in terms of formatting and style and everything like that, which is important. It absolutely is. But those are the things that we can help with, right? Really spend some time in thinking about what you did, what you want to get across, and what your next step is going to be. Only you can do that. Only the student or the candidate can do that.
I guess besides, oh, no, you can do your question, Margaret. I was just going to say, something I always like to talk about is what are like the most common / biggest mistakes you see on a resume? That's kind of what I wanted to ask you guys.
One thing that was on my mind was, which absolutely relates to this, is the one page, right? Like I think we all have seen students have 2 pages of their resume or 1.5 pages. And I think that is kind of a common mistake. And I was I was kind of thinking, my question was framed as like, why does that matter? And maybe that's kind of my curiosity is really like, we know that there are mistakes such as having more than one page, but why is that a mistake? And what is it that recruiters are and aren't looking for? What is it that they do and really don't want to see? So maybe like to add that into your question, Jessica. But yeah, I would say that the one pager, which can be really hard to do, especially if you've had a lot of jobs and experiences or you're really involved, for sure.
I think one of the biggest things I've seen is their title, their like name and like phone number is always a lot bigger than everything else. So it's already taking up like a quarter of the page and they haven't even started like their information. So it always goes to a second page, and like the advice is always just make your name smaller. Like I don't know why, but every single one that I see always has a larger title than it needs to.
Or surprisingly, the weird tip around that has been really literally to copy and paste it into a header. It saves you at least 2 spaces on your page if you just copy and paste it into a header. Well, I listed mine. I think the common mistake that I see is the bullet points that just list the daily tasks. I think that's the one where you have great formatting, everything looks great, but the bullet points really stopped at the task. You really got to push it to that next level.
For me, I see a lot of mistakes when it comes to readability. There are just certain things you do on a resume to make it more readable that a lot of students don't think about. So for example, like you have your headers, right? Education, experience. Putting a line underneath that goes across the page makes your resume so much easier to read. It's the smallest little thing. And if you add that in, it'll make your resume so much easier to read. Or putting the dates to the right-hand side, separating them out, makes it so much easier to read. Italicizing your degree makes it easier to read, makes it stand out more. And I've been seeing a lot of resumes where it's like, you have such great information, but I have to spend like 5 minutes reading it, when in reality, recruiters are spending seconds reading it. And so I've seen a lot of just small issues with readability that could be really easily fixed. And one of my pet peeves is 2-column resumes, when you have information on one half and then the other half, because that's not how we naturally read things. We just like going from top to down. So really making things like 1 column makes it so much easier to read, so much nicer. And so that's something we can help you with in career development, readability. But I think that's really one thing that I see a lot in resumes.
Jessica, and I think that goes back to Margaret's point too about the why, right? Like, why 1 page? Why does it have to be formatted this way? Why these headings, or why in this order, right? There is so much time, resources, tools, and people dedicated to crafting the resume. And in reality, the resume gets reviewed in seconds, right? And so the resume has to do its job in a couple of seconds. For as much time as you're going to spend thinking about it, and writing it and consulting with people and editing it and having many others review it and putting it through all of these tools and resources, you do all of that work on the front end so that in a few seconds, that recruiter will be able to get exactly what you wanted them to get out of it. And so the 1 page, the headers, the format, the font, all of that is so that you can effectively get the content from that bullet point into, you can get the recruiter to read the content of that bullet point easily, right? So I think that's going to be the important thing to keep in mind here, that readability and who is your reader, right? You have to keep in mind the recruiter's job. They're going to be reading, this is in their role, whether it's, actually I should even take a step back because it doesn't always start with the recruiter anymore. We're really talking about AI and your applicant tracking system, and then the recruiter, and then the hiring manager, right? So you really have to think about that audience when you're putting that resume together. And what we hear from recruiters when we ask them, what is a good resume, or what are the elements of a resume, or what's most important to you in a resume? What we hear from recruiters and from employers is that they want it to be clear, concise, and consistent. They want to be able to pull the information that they need from this page in a few seconds, because they're going to be reading hundreds of resumes. Yeah. And again, I think that might be different in different industries, right? I think that's the most common thing. When you're thinking about a CV or the academic world, it can definitely be, beyond this, but we're specifically talking about that resume.
I think also too, when it comes to resumes, I think everyone starts at a certain base resume, but then depending on your major, it's going to vary, right? Like if you're a marketing major or graphic design, like your resume may have colors in it, may have some kind of design in it. But if you're in accounting, colors and designs don't really matter. They just are more focused on the content. Or if you're in computer science or engineering, maybe instead of having skills at the bottom, you can make it your second section to show, hey, I know Java, C++, or this and that. And so I think a lot of times making that resume and tweaking it to your major comes kind of once you have a base resume, and then you talk with professors and people in the field. But what do you guys recommend for students when they want to first create a resume? So, you're a freshman, you're a sophomore, wherever you're at, you want to make a resume, you go online, you see all those templates from Microsoft Word, Google Docs, I've seen them all. How do you recommend a student start their resume? Where should they start?
I think one of the biggest things is, at least this is what I did when I first wrote my first resume, was I just basically got a pen and paper and wrote down everything that I felt could go on it. So like volunteer experience, part-time jobs, extracurricular activities. Like those were the big three that I really felt were, at least for my first resume, to be on there. Because at that point so for my first job, I didn't really have anything to put on there. So I had to really come up with that volunteer experience that I had already accomplished, and then extracurriculars to show that I was still involved for that first job. So I think that's a great start, is just write down everything that you think you can put on your resume if it's your first one. And then, deduct whatever you feel you don't need after it's completed.
I would say use the resources that are available to you. You don't have to start from scratch and figure it out on your own. There's so much out there to help you. And in particular for North Central College students, we definitely did take the guesswork out of formatting and by making a template available to you. So if students can literally go into Handshake and download a template that we've developed that we know will be effective in that applicant tracking system, where the formatting is right and the headers and it's organized in the right places. So you don't have to worry about, is this in the right place? Is this the font I'm going to use? And you can focus more on the content. I'd also say absolutely get it reviewed. Right. Don't think that this is not a solo project. This is an area that you're going to want people to read it. There's going to be a lot of eyes on it. We have our career peer advisors in career development that can, as Jessica said, you review so many resumes. You can really give some feedback there, especially with the use of our rubric that Barb put together to make sure that things are looking the way that they need to look. So I'd say use the resources that are already available. Don't feel like you have to do this on your own, and get it reviewed.
Going off of the reviewed, I always say there's no such thing as too many people seeing your resume. Never such a thing. That is unheard of, because even though someone, may not know exactly what the formatting should look like, I had a friend who majored in computer science, and they had computer science spelled wrong, like computer was misspelled in their degree. And it's their degree, and if the spelling error was there, like 10 people reviewed it, no one caught it, but then out of the blue, someone read it, was like, oh my gosh, you spelled computer wrong, you spelled your own degree wrong. And so things like that are caught when you have more eyes on it.
And can we talk about how common that is, honestly? And it's not a judgment on folks that are writing resumes, but it's one of those things. You're looking at these documents over and over and over again. These are the kinds of things that will begin to be invisible to you. You won't notice that a major part of something is misspelled, even, or that your phone number is wrong, or that something is out of place. After a while of looking at this document over and over, it's I guess inattentional blindness. You don't even notice it anymore, which is the benefit of having multiple eyes on it for those small mistakes, which we know matter. We don't ever want to have our resumes thrown out or be disqualified or not move to the next step of the job search process because of a small mistake, like a grammatical error or a spelling error or anything like that. We want to make sure that all of these small mistakes get caught, and the best way to do that is, multiple eyes on your document.
So I was thinking about this too, in terms of if someone is like never written a resume before, but they know I got to write one, whether it's for an internship they're applying for, or maybe a professor has said, yep, you just got to have your first one for this class. I was like thinking how funny it is, because welcome, you will now, unlike an assignment, this will be an ongoing thing for the rest of your life. And right. I was thinking about that too, as you two were talking about, like you always need more eyes on it. So my dad is an artist, and he used to, there's actually his paint. I have his paintings all around my house. And I used to ask him, like, Dad, how do you know when you're done? And he was like, I'm never done. I'm literally never done. I just at some point have to decide, like, I'm done working on it. It's good enough for now. And he will often, like, when he'll look at it and be like, you know what? No, that one needs more yellow or whatever. And I was thinking about how that's like a good metaphor for a resume. It's never actually done. Even when it's good enough that you're like, okay, I have to apply for this job. And a funny thing, I don't know if other people experience this, but like there's no better spell check than like hitting send, and then you're suddenly going to see I spelled computer wrong. So maybe like send it to yourself first and you'll catch something, but it's never done. And I think that's kind of, it doesn't feel good to say that, because unlike an assignment, you want to be able to like cross it off your to-do list, and you can for now, but you're always going to need to keep working on it. And it's like, I guess it's like art. I'm not an artist, but you're never actually finished.
I've heard it called a living document is what it's called. Like it's
right.
Always living with you.
Right. And Margaret, that's such a great story. I love that. And actually, Jessica, what I was going to say is the number one error that I see is experience is spelled incorrectly. So when people flip the E and I, and Heidi's right. Well, you look at it so many times, and sometimes for some reason spell check doesn't correct it. One of the things that I was thinking about, though, is for someone who hasn't written a resume, or maybe you're a first year or a second year student, my, recommendation and what I hope someone would take away from this is everyone has something of value to place on a resume. That just like Jessica said, those part-time jobs, those volunteer opportunities, but also thinking about what you've gained from your major, academic projects, coursework that you have completed. All of that is of value and can be placed on a resume. So, my hope is that when a student comes into career development and has a resume review, that they'll walk out with increased confidence and maybe even recognize that there was something that they left off their resume because they didn't think it was of value. Everybody has something that they can place on a resume, and that's where I think that having multiple people that you can talk about with this process, because sometimes people will see or remember something that you've been involved with that you completely forgot about, or we can be completing a resume review and we'll ask a question like, tell me a little bit more about this. And you're like, oh yeah, I got employee of the month or something like that. So all of that sort of matters. And again, everybody has made just really great comments. I think it's something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be a painful process.
I have to say, I've been thinking about a particular story of a student that Barb you met with, actually. I don't know if you are going to remember who I'm talking about, but I think one of a good lesson to learn is to be flexible and to know that your resume absolutely will change, and feedback is good, and being open to feedback is really good. I'm thinking of a student in particular who was literally brokenhearted after receiving some feedback because he worked so hard on a resume and thought it looked great. And then he met with career development, and he felt like his heart was broken, and he was feeling like he was not accepting the feedback, but then ended up using the resume and realized that he was getting interviews, and he did great at a career fair, and received multiple offers, and then later came in to meet and said, he realized, you'll remember who I'm talking about now.
I do remember.
And I'll never forget him saying he realized after some time that what he had to do was break up with his resume in order to be able to move on. And then all of these doors were open for him. Do you remember this, Barb?
I do. And I'm laughing and I'm remembering this because I needed to give him some feedback in a very caring way, but it really was hard for him to hear. And I think that, I don't remember who said this earlier, but we're very attached to what's on our resume.
Yes.
It's very personal. It reflects who we are. But there is a time when you have to look at and understand everything on your resume has to add value. And you look at it through the eyes of the employer. And the employer doesn't have the personal connection to what's on the resume. But I do remember the student, and that it was helpful to hear from his perspective about what it was like from going from hearing the feedback to recognizing that he had now had a very effective resume. But I love that when he said, because he came and shared that with me, he's like, I had to break up with my resume.
But I think that's important. It's important
It is.
because we do get, we have really great accomplishments in our lives that sometimes in that next step aren't as relevant. And that's a difficult thing to think about, right? That particular award or this thing that you worked on throughout all of high school. And now we're telling you, you're in your junior year, don't include any high school information in there. That can be a difficult thing to think about. I think we have to remember this is not a transcript, right? You will have an opportunity when you apply online or when you submit a transcript to add more information, but this is your foot in the door. In this one page and this few seconds, what are the things that you really want to lead with, right? Yeah.
I mean, it looks like we've had some really good productive conversation. Is there any last minute tips anyone would like to add about resumes that comes to mind?
I think the last thing I would add is we often get questions about wanting to stylize a resume with pictures, colors, fonts, graphics, color, or other things to make the resume stand out. And I think this is another thing, and this is like, I'm all bad news today. I think this is another kind of a thing that can be difficult sometimes, is to tell a student that they have to remove those things because it won't be successful in an applicant tracking system, or because we want to highlight their experience and not, it can detract from the actual content of the resume. So I would say to keep it simple. That's what the recruiters are looking for.
And I would add, unless you're in more of a creative industry and it's the standard for your field, and then also recognizing that there are standard resumes if you're using a creative font, or a creative resume or a 2-column resume, because that is something that is frequent for maybe who somebody's in graphic design or communications. But no matter what, I think the points that Heidi, you made, that it still has to be very clear, concise, and consistent and effective.
Yes.
So I think that, just letting students know that, there is flexibility with resumes, but it also has to reflect your industry. And the bottom line is, I think actually Jessica maybe said this, is that an employer should really be able to quickly see your contributions and what the value that you would bring as a potential employee. If they can't see that, then the resume is not effective. And that's where it can feel like your resume goes into a big black hole and you're not getting responses. So the question is always, is my resume effective? Does it reflect my value in what I can contribute to an organization?
Right.
I think my final point that I'd want to emphasize is to tailor your resume to what you're applying for. And I think that can be hard to hear, especially if you're a student who's in the middle of a very, a job search, and it's taxing and it takes even more time on top of probably all the other things that you're having to put into that. And so I guess, one, I do want to acknowledge, and I think it brings up what you all were saying, is that it's personal and it can be difficult. And so get yourself support, and hopefully you can use us, career development. We are here to support you through that. But to tailor your resume, and I know it's extra time, but holy cow, well, that's going to help. That's huge. It's so important. I just wanted to emphasize that.
All right. So I guess that's it for our podcast today. If you want to talk more about resumes, you can always schedule an appointment with us on Handshake. We can talk through your resume, help you create a resume, and we look forward to you joining us next time around.
Thanks. Bye.